Alright, so first things first, when sewing the seam for a zipper, specifically a centered zipper, there's a couple of things that we're going to do. First, as with any plain seam, you're going to make sure that the right sides of your fabric are facing together so that the wrong sides are facing out. You're going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance, which is your standard seam allowance, unless your pattern says otherwise. You're always going to use a 5/8 inch seam allowance. First thing I'm going to do is use a regular stitch length, and my machine is partially computerized, so it'll do a couple of locking stitches to get us started. And you'll see as the fabric feeds through the machine, there is a pink chalk mark right here. That is where I'm going to stop my regular stitches. And right now I'm using the hand wheel on the side of my machine to get to where I want to go without going past it. I'll back stitch a couple and forward stitch a couple. And now I'm going to change my stitch length from a regular stitch length, which is usually between 2 and 3 on standard sewing machines. I'm going to take that all the way up to a 5. And what this will do is it will baste my seam the rest of the way. Basting stitches are very long temporary stitches that do come out. When you are doing things like making gathers, or if you're doing a set-in sleeve where you have to work an outer curve for a sleeve into an inner curve, the armhole on your garment, then it does take some manipulation of the fabric, and it is easier to do it with a basting stitch than with a standard stitch. So here you can see how long these stitches are compared to our standard stitches. Alright, and our second step is going to be to press the seam open. So I will go take care of that, and I'll be right back. Alright, and here we are with our seam pressed open. Okay, it's nice and flat. No wrinkles or anything on the outside of the fabric, or the outside of the garment rather. And we're going to make sure that we have the regular stitching down here closest to us and the basting furthest away, facing away. Alright, now comes the zipper. This is a standard skirt zipper. Okay, it's about 7 inches long. Here is the pull, here is the stop. And we're going to lay this face down with the zipper pull facing up. And I always like to make sure that the zipper stop is just above where the regular stitching stops. There we go. So I'm going to lay that like that. And then use some pins to hold it in place at the bottom as well as at the top. And the reason this is called a centered zipper is because we are centering the zipper teeth on the seam line as best we can. And once we get the zipper stitched in place, it will, on the outside of the garment, it will have the same amount of fabric stitched down on either side of the zipper teeth. Okay, so here we go. And you can feel through your seam line, I apologize if I'm off the frame a little bit. I'll try and keep this centered where you can see it. You can feel where the zipper teeth are. So I've got them right there, and that's not exactly centered. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that over just the slightest bit. There we go, so that it's more centered. And I will take another pin, and I will poke it through. Okay. Another pin. Now I was doing a little bit of research, watching other people's videos to see how they conducted their zipper installation tutorials. And there is one woman who actually uses blue painter's tape on the back of the item that she's installing a zipper in. She actually uses like 3 pieces, you know, one up here, one in the middle, and one down below. And that is effective because what it does is it holds everything in place, all of it. It touches all 3 layers of fabric, the fabric itself, the seam allowance, and the zipper tape. And it does hold it still. I like to use pins simply because they are reusable and there is no danger of them gumming up my needle. Okay, so I'll just set this out of the way and pull my sewing machine back towards us. Well, I should say towards me. When I say us, it makes it sound like I have some type of multiple personality disorder. So there's really just me. I am not multiples. Okay, so one thing I need to do is change out my presser foot. And I believe I put my zipper foot in here. Ah, there it is. It's terribly unorganized in there. Alright, so here is my zipper foot, and this one looks a little different than some of you might be accustomed to seeing. This is the front, this is what faces me, and then this is the back. And the reason I have these notches here, these open spaces, is because on the back of my sewing machine, I do have an extra attachment that helps to feed the fabric through so that it doesn't get all bunched up. If the top fabric shifts, then, because I mean the bottom of the presser foot is smooth, so if the top fabric shifts, it will shift forward while the bottom fabric is shifted back by the feed dogs. So this extra piece that I have back here has teeth on it that will grip, much like the feed dogs do, to push the fabric through, and it just keeps things from getting out of whack and off kilter. So what I will do is I will make sure that I am stitching down the right side of my zipper first. So I'm going to make sure that the needle is to the left side of my presser foot. And I'm also going to move my needle over to the left. Okay. And here we go. And I still have this pin up here. I'm actually going to take that out and set it aside. I am comfortable with the way things are as far as my pinning. So now I can put my presser foot down and I will start to stitch. So I can guarantee you that most times when you stitch a centered zipper into a garment, you are going to have some starting issues. And I just realized I've started with basting stitches, so allow me to change that stitch length back to a 2.5. There we go. Now I'm going to back stitch a little bit more just to make up for my little mistake. There we go. When you get started stitching a centered zipper in place, you may run into some issues. The biggest one that I find is the back of the zipper pull actually generally gets hung up on the feed dogs. And that's not a major issue, but you do have to be aware of it. Just know that if it happens, it's not abnormal. It's not going to ruin everything. But the one thing that you should keep in mind is that you can lift your presser foot just a tad to help dislodge it and then be on your merry way with your stitching. So as you can see, I am trying to keep an even distance from the seam line. I'm doing a pretty good job of that. A trick that my sewing teacher in high school shared with me was that when I'm stitching a centered zipper, I can't, once I've got it pinned down and I've got, it's all basted and pinned down and ready to go, I can take a piece of Scotch tape and run it down the length of the seam to where the zipper stop is, and I just stitch just along the edge of that piece of tape. And you can see I have my pin here. I'm going to go ahead and take that out now too. Set that aside. Alright, and I can feel my zipper stopper right there. So I'm going to stitch down just past it, and you'll notice that my needle is down, presser foot goes up, and now we pivot the fabric. And if I do that, I'm still just too close to that zipper stop. So I'm going to do one more stitch, use the hand wheel, presser foot, well, needle down, presser foot up, pivot the fabric, stitch across, use your hand wheel if you need to. Sometimes the sewing machine speed is set too high or our feet are too heavy, much like when we are driving. So again, to pivot, needle down, presser foot up, turn your fabric, presser foot down, keep going. And then you just stitch up the other side. You can go a little bit faster on this side, since everything is pretty well held in place with your first line of stitching. Back stitch. All right, let's take a look at what we've got. So the stitching isn't perfect, and down here it is slightly off. This is where the Scotch tape comes in handy. Or if you are counting, you can see that I have 1, 2, 3.5 stitches, and here I have 1, 2.5 stitches. So I could have gone one more stitch and then started up the other side. But you can see where I did get back on track. I compensated here, and it's only off by about 1/8 of an inch, which really isn't that big a deal. If I were actually using this fabric for a garment, I would be using matching thread so that a tiny mistake like this would not show up. But I'm using the red for visibility purposes. So the next thing we do is we take our seam ripper and we very carefully pick out our stitches, our basting stitches. And you want to make sure that you start above where your regular stitching stopped. So you can feel around in there with your seam ripper and find the zipper pull, or sorry, the zipper stop, because the pull's at the other end. And then you can start just above that. I'm going to do this gently, hopefully somewhat quickly. And this technique that I'm starting to use right here, where I just run the seam ripper right through, I don't really recommend this. Number one, because I could injure myself. And number two, I could rip a hole in the fabric. Now, normally, if this were just a regular seam that did not contain a zipper, I could just, turn the garment inside out and then restitch that seam just a little further past that hole. But since we are taking out the basting stitches to expose a zipper, now we are left with a folded edge of fabric, and if that has a hole in it, we have to take out the zipper, take out the seam, patch the hole, and do the whole thing over again. So it's good practice, it's good reinforcement. However, it's not desirable because none of us want to do extra work. All right, so ignoring all the little bits of thread, we're going to open up our seam and check to see that our zipper functions. There we go. That's our centered zipper. Very simple. Alright, so our second instruction is for a lapped zipper, and you can see that I've switched back to my regular presser foot, and there is good reason. And you can also see that rather than starting at the edge of the fabric, I'm starting at my mark, my pink mark. So what I will do is I will just start stitching here. I will stitch to the end of the fabric, and everything above that pink mark actually stays open. That is where we are going to put the zipper. Alright, so simple. Let me rethread my machine real quick since that got sucked up in there. Alright, there we go. I swear to you, an automatic needle threader is probably my favorite feature on a sewing machine. My eyes have gone pretty downhill in the last 10 years, and this thing has been a lifesaver. Alright, so we'll push my sewing machine out of the way. Now here, you can see that we just have a very short seam, and I do apologize if I keep bumping the camera. It's still on that weird gooseneck stand. So, oops, here we go. Now, with a lapped zipper, it is not going to be symmetrical like our centered zipper. The best example I can think of for a lapped zipper is the fly on your trousers. Or if you watched my previous episode, there's also a very clear picture of the lapped zipper that I put in my flared skirt from the Gertie Sews Vintage Casual book. So what I'm doing here is I'm just being kind of lazy and I'm finger pressing this, okay? You can hear my fingernails dragging along it. And what that does is it just creases the fabric. I don't have to go upstairs or anything and, you know, turn on the iron and all that good stuff. So down here we have used our 5/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to take my seam gauge. Let's see if I can get this started. Sometimes my son picks up my sewing tools and plays with them, and they don't function quite right when I get them back. He's 5. He is very curious. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set it to 1/2 inch, and we will kind of push this, okay, so that we've got our 1/2 inch, and I'm still just going to finger press the whole way. I'm going to crease this. I am currently downstairs in my dining room, and I don't really want to go upstairs to my sewing room, so I won't. I will be lazy, lazy, lazy. Alright, so there's 1/2 inch, and we will do this all the way to the top. You can actually use the edge of this to help. There we go. Now, this might work on cotton calico, but I wouldn't recommend it on heavier weight fabrics or lighter weight fabrics. The heavier weight fabrics will not crease as easily, and the lighter weight fabrics could become damaged. So what I do recommend is using your iron at the recommended setting for your fiber content and just doing it the right way. So this is a shortcut that I learned in my high school home ec class, because even though we all had sewing machines, we did not all have our own personal iron and ironing board. And growing up in Prince George's County Public Schools, I did have very large classes. We had maybe 1 or 2 irons and ironing boards set up, and the lines at them were always very long. So if I could avoid getting up to stand in line and lose time at my sewing machine, I would. So I learned to do this. And also, because I was in high school and needed, you know, to watch my budget, because I was working, I actually worked at Joann Fabrics during the time that I was taking these sewing classes in school. I worked at Joann Fabrics and I got a discount, a pretty hefty one, but the majority of my fabrics that I would purchase were cotton calico, because at the time they were only $2.99 a yard, and now they range anywhere from $7.99 to $15.99, and it's absurd. But anyway, I mean, just like with anything, the price of cotton has gone up over the years. Alright, so this side we have our 1/2 inch, and then on this side we are going to have our regular 5/8 inch. Okay, so here we go. We just fold it up, try not to bump the camera, make sure that this is consistent all the way. Use my little cheat method. Five-eighths, 5/8. Good, hold it still, press. Alright, and you can see how nicely this works. Again, it's just for cotton calico, and I don't recommend this on any heavier weight or lighter weight fabrics, or honestly on cotton calico. But, you know, like I said, laziness wins right now. At least I'm honest about it, right? All right, so here we go. Now we've got a half inch seam allowance on this side and our 5/8 seam allowance on this side. And they will overlap by 1/8 of an inch. Or maybe it goes this way. Here we go. Yes, that's correct. Getting myself all backwards right now. All right, so now it's time to lay out the zipper. All right, as you can see, this zipper that I have here is longer than the opening that I have, and that's okay. So what we'll do is we'll flip it over to the back side again. Okay, if you were sewing a garment, this would be the inside. All right, and on this side we have our 1/2 inch. On this side we have our 5/8. Now, when you are sewing a lapped zipper, you always want to make sure that the 5/8 inch seam allowance is on the back part of the garment if it's a side zipper. If it's a back zipper where it goes straight up the center back seam, it doesn't matter which side this is on. But let's say you're putting in a hip zipper like I did in my flared skirt. I want to make sure that the 5/8 inch seam allowance is on the back part of the garment, and I'll show you why. So we're going to get that lined up after we figure out which is which, and here we want to make sure that we are close to but not on the zipper teeth. We'll go ahead and start pinning this in place. Try to keep it a consistent distance away, just for uniformity. Honestly, even if you're not that great at sewing yet, if you can pay attention to detail, that will make all the difference. When I taught this full time at Bowie, a lot of my students would get really overwhelmed with, oh, well, I can't do it as well as you. And I would tell them, I've been doing this much longer than you have. I've been doing this for years and years, and you've just been doing this for a few weeks. And that would calm them a little bit. So when it came time to do a project, I wasn't the type of teacher that would say, okay, we're all gonna make an apron, or we're all gonna make a skirt, because I did have boys in my class. And it wouldn't be right for me to make them, sew an apron or a skirt, because if it's not going to be functional for them, why would they want to put in the effort? So what I would do is I would give them, instructionals. We would go over lessons, and I would do demonstrations and have them practice. And then when it came project time, I would have them choose from a list of requirements. Your garment has to be something that is worn on your bottom half, a skirt, shorts, pants, whatever. And it must contain 3 of these elements. 4 different seams were listed: plain seam, flat felled, welt, and French. It could have a waistband or facing. Didn't have to have both, but it had to have one or the other. Or it could have a casing for like elastic or a drawstring. Okay, so there we go. And let me just interrupt myself here for just a second. You can see that our smaller seam allowance, our 1/2 inch, is going to lay over the other one, but we're gonna start with this first. Anyway, going back to my story about when I taught my students at Bowie, as long as it had a certain number of required elements, 1 from this category, 2 from that, whatever, they were a lot less intimidated by it. And they knew how it was going to be graded, because I would give them a rubric that told them exactly how it was going to be graded. Yes, I'm looking for this. Can you do it? Can you do it properly? Is it neat? It didn't have to be perfect. That they had to show me that they knew enough to do that particular technique or complete that particular task. And it really helped to build their confidence. And what happened was I wound up with students who were taking all 4 levels of my classes, and they just got better and better and surprised me with every project that they would do. Their skills would just improve, and it was amazing. I absolutely loved it. So I just want you to know that it doesn't have to be perfect. Pay attention to your details as you go though, and you'll start figuring out ways to make it look the way you want to, or make it look just a little bit better than it did last time, and eventually you'll have it exactly the way you want it. Alright, so back to the lesson, here we go. You see that I've switched to my zipper foot again, and I've moved my needle way over to the left. And here we go. Regular stitch length. I'm removing my pins as I go. Sometimes it doesn't really matter if you sew over the pins. I look at it as hitting potholes and speed bumps in my car. I try to avoid it if I can. If it is not something that I can avoid, I try to do it as slowly and gently as possible to minimize the damage to my vehicle. And honestly, Betty, my sewing machine, I named her Betty, she's getting a little loud. I think she's due for a tune-up. So I think that'll be taking place in June while I am at the beach. Alright. And I hope you're noticing that I haven't done anything with this part yet, and there is a reason for that. Which I will explain in just a moment. Backstitch a couple and cut. Alright, push that out of the way. I don't have nearly this amount of space on my work surface in my sewing room, so the dining room table will probably serve as my sewing room for at least until further notice. Alright, so here you can see where our 5/8 inch seam allowance is. That's on this side. And then we have our 1/2 inch. And the reason it's called a lapped zipper is because the narrower seam allowance laps over the zipper teeth and laps over the stitching on the back side, you know, the back piece of the garment where the zipper is installed. Okay, so it's lapped. The reason we want this part on the back part of the garment instead of the front part of the garment is because of the way the lap goes. So if this were this is the back, this is the front. If this were facing the front, if it were over here, then it would be really ugly. I mean, you'd be looking at something like that from the front of your garment, and nobody wants to see that. People want to see that. That is much more pleasing to the eye. So that's why we do it. Alright, now here you can see that I'm rearranging the way that I have this laid out. And I'm going to manipulate my fabric just a little bit, scoot it over, and I will start pinning to get this in place where I want it. I'm not going to pin all the way up here by the zipper pull, just because it gets to be a little bit cumbersome with the zipper pull and the pins and all. Oops. And what I've done here is I've just pinned under the zipper teeth, and that's okay. As long as the seam allowance is getting pinned down to the zipper tape, it's all good. Because our goal is to catch the seam allowance between the stitching and the zipper tape so that it doesn't come out and have a raggedy edge showing next to our zipper. Alright, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to start my stitching right here. I'll stitch across and then I'll come up this side. Alright, so as usual, we will start with a little bit of back stitching. So I go forward, and it's okay to stitch straight through nylon zipper teeth. If you try, however, to stitch through that metal stop, you will break your needle and you could damage your machine. So please Be very aware of where you're stitching. All right, here we go. Needle is down, presser foot comes up, we pivot, presser foot back down, and begin sewing. Remove your pins as you go. Like I said, dodge those potholes and speed bumps. Take care of your car. The thing I like best about a lapped zipper is there's no basting to contend with, and honestly, I think it looks a lot better than a centered zipper. Centered zippers have their place on coats and jackets, obviously, and purses and stuff like that. But as far as, you know, regular garments go, not outerwear or accessories, I really think that a lapped zipper looks better than a centered zipper. Ultimately though, the invisible zipper is my favorite. All right, so there we go. Let's take a look at these side by side. Okay, here we have our lapped zipper. Just pull that up, double check it, make sure that your seam allowance has been caught in the stitching. Make sure that the zipper teeth have not been caught in the stitching. Check it for function. There's a little crease in that. There we go. All right, so here we have our lapped zipper and our centered zipper. So now you have all the information you need to go try this yourself. You can do it. It's not hard. All right, so now I'm going to show you how to cut and stitch a pocket into a plain seam where the pattern actually does not call for a pocket. It's actually a very simple process. So we're going to start with this white fabric. This is just white cotton muslin, and this will be our pocket. And here is the pattern piece that I have drawn and prepared based on the length of the opening of the pocket in the side of my skirt. Now on the skirt itself, the pocket will have an opening of 7 inches. I did measure that just a few minutes ago. So what I've done here on my pocket pattern piece, I've made it slightly longer at 8 1/4 inches. So that's going to be a 7-inch opening. So what that means is we need to reposition our measuring tape. I'll need to get my chalk. And I'm going to mark right here and right here. Okay, that's 7 inches. So what's going to be happening here is I'm going to lay this out this way. And you're probably wondering, why don't you lay it out this way? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, you can see that this fabric has been torn, and I did that on purpose. Muslin is some of the cheapest cotton that you can possibly get, and because it is inexpensive, you can't really count on it to be straight of grain. So even if you measure something against the selvage, which is the bound edge of the fabric that's created in the factory, that's, you know, on either side, either edge rather, the grain can still be off. So what we'll do is we'll take this edge of the pocket and we'll place it right here. I'm going to slide this down. Right there, just like that. And I'm going to pin this in place. I don't need a ton of pins, just a few. Okay, and then we'll cut it out. So one of the reasons in addition to making sure that it's straight of grain, one of the reasons I'm pinning the pocket along this straight edge is because the way the skirt is cut, that seam is actually on the bias. And when something is bias cut, like I explained in one of my earlier videos, that means that that fabric will stretch. Allow me to demonstrate right after I put this pin in here. Okay, so here we have our fabric, and you can see that the grain goes side to side and up and down, no stretch. But if we pull it diagonally, there is stretch. If you pull it on the bias, there is stretch. So rather than go to all this trouble to put a pocket in and have the pocket itself, the opening, just stretch out, having the pocket laid this way so that the edge is on the straight of grain will help to stabilize the seam and the pocket opening on the skirt, giving it longer life and less likelihood that it will stretch out. So now that we've cut our pocket on a double thickness of fabric, giving us 2 identical pieces in one cut, we're going to turn this, and you can see the pink marks that I made at our 7 inches. I am going to clip that, and I am going to clip that. And the reason that I've done this is because I already have notches clipped on the side of the skirt where the pocket pieces are going to go. These line up with those, and these will indicate where I need to stitch the pocket piece onto the skirt, and also where I need to stop sewing once I start sewing the side seams. And you'll see what I mean in just a minute. Alright, so here I have the side of my skirt. I got this fabric at Joann Fabrics the other day. It was in the 1930s reproduction section. It was on sale. I don't normally wear something this childish looking, but I thought it was really cute and would be a fun summer skirt. Anyway, you can see here that I've got one pin that marks my notch, and I have one pin here and that marks my other notch. And again, this is the pocket opening. And to draw your attention to the stitching that you see here along the edge of the fabric, this is done with a serger overlock machine. And what that does, if you are unfamiliar, is it stitches, trims, and finishes the raw edge of the fabric all at once. It's pretty fantastic. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I am going to take one of my pocket pieces and I am going to lay this here. Get the edges of the fabric even, and I am going to match up my notches, and I will pin. So the first bit that we're going to stitch is going to be here. And we will do this on both the front piece of the skirt and the back piece of the skirt. Alright, we're ready to sew. Alright, it is difficult to see because I am using matching thread, but here is my line of stitching, and I did it at 5/8 of an inch with my right side facing up. Okay, simply because when we open the pocket out like that, we're going to be stitching down here, over here, around this curved edge and across the bottom, and all of this is going to be pressed to the inside. And I will get to that in just a moment. One thing I would like to draw your attention to is how to place the second pocket piece. Because you're probably wondering, okay, well, if I put it on one particular side of the skirt for the front, I should probably put it on the same side of the skirt for the back. This is not so. What you'll want to do is put it on the mirrored side, okay? So here we go, I've got my notches marked. I can lay my pocket piece out on top of this, just like I did the other. Pin it in place, and I'll go sew this one too. And even if you're a beginner, even if you haven't been sewing for a long time, this is a super simple technique. Really, really simple. And pockets are so handy. They're totally worth the effort. All right, here we are back at my wonderful sewing machine. And if you recall in my previous episode in which I talked about different types of zippers and understitching, you'll remember I showed you understitching at the pocket seam. So I'm going to show you just how to do that. Super simple, keeps the pocket pulled to the inside of the garment, and it's worth all the effort, which really isn't much, honestly. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have our seam allowances pressed that way. Like, you can't see it. We're going to have our seam allowances pressed towards the inside of the skirt, okay? So basically we just do that, making sure that our seam allowances are underneath the pocket lining. And there should be some markings on your presser foot. Mine has this red mark here, and I'm going to keep that even with my seam line. That is approximately 1/8 of an inch, and I will just keep that steady from one end to the other. And I will do the same on the other pocket, making sure that the seam allowances are underneath the pocket lining rather than underneath the skirt. Okay, and here we have this one. Alright, so again, lining up my red mark with my seam line, making sure my seam allowances are out this way, towards the pocket lining. And here we go, one end to the other. And it's okay if it isn't perfect. Nobody is going to be inspecting. I am not grading you on this. But my advice to you is to try and keep your seams and your understitching all consistent. Okay, and you can see there, mine gets a little close to the seam line, but that's alright, it still does the job. Alright, ready for the next step, how to actually make the pocket. Alright folks, as we established earlier when we were talking about zippers, we are going to make sure that our right sides are together, okay? But now we've got a little bit more to match up. So I'm just gonna pick this up here and show you. Okay, these are my facings. Those of you that are a little more experienced with sewing or have been doing it a little bit longer, you're probably noticing that I've done my facings a little bit different. Rather than stitch the side seams of my skirt and then add the facings, I've chosen to stitch the facings onto the skirt pieces first and then do my side seams, simply because if I need to take the skirt in or let it out at any point, it makes it a lot easier to do it if I just have to pick out a little bit of understitching and then you know, either make the seam allowance larger or smaller, rather than having to pick off the facing after picking out the understitching. It gets to be a bit much. So this is just a trick I learned with altering men's trousers, and there will be more about that in a later episode. But that's why I'm doing that. It just makes it easier to let things in, or take things in and let things out, if necessary. Okay, so here we go with matching up our waist seam, okay, right there. And we also have to match up, there we go, there's our notch right there. We have to make sure that we are matching up our pocket as much as possible, and that we have a clear indication of where our stitching needs to stop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this pin in a different direction. And what that tells me is, hey, you need to stop. I don't have to mark my fabric, nothing. I just look at that pin and think, oh, hey, yeah, I need to stop there. Then we'll come down here to the bottom of the pocket and we will do it again. We'll make sure that our seams are pretty well lined up. Okay, that is not pretty well lined up, so we will do a little bit better. Try it again. There we go. Alright, now that I'm happy with that, I can find my other notch, which is right there. Also put this pin in backwards, so I know to leave this open. Okay. And after this, you just go ahead around your pocket, pin, 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 and then we sew. Alright folks, as we established earlier when we were talking about zippers, we are going to make sure that our right sides are together, okay? But now we've got a little bit more to match up. So I'm just going to pick this up here and show you. Okay, these are my facings. Those of you that are a little more experienced with sewing or have been doing it a little bit longer, you're probably noticing that I've done my facings a little bit different. Rather than stitch the side seams of my skirt and then add the facings, I've chosen to stitch the facings onto the skirt pieces first and then do my side seams, simply because if I need to take the skirt in or let it out at any point, it makes it a lot easier to do it if I just have to pick out a little bit of understitching and then either make the seam allowance larger or smaller, rather than having to pick off the facing after picking out the understitching. It gets to be a bit much. So this is just a trick I learned with altering men's trousers, and there will be more about that in a later episode. But that's why I'm doing that. It just makes it easier to let things in, or take things in and let things out, if necessary. Okay, so here we go with matching up our waist seam, okay, right there. And we also have to match up, there we go, there's our notch right there. We have to make sure that we are matching up our pocket as much as possible, and that we have a clear indication of where our stitching needs to stop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this pin in a different direction. And what that tells me is, hey, you need to stop. I don't have to mark my fabric, nothing. I just look at that pin and think, oh, hey, yeah, I need to stop there. Then we'll come down here to the bottom of the pocket and we will do it again. We'll make sure that our seams are pretty well lined up. Okay, that is not pretty well lined up, so we will do a little bit better. Try it again. There we go. Alright, now that I'm happy with that, I can find my other notch, which is right there. Also put this pin in backwards, so I know to leave this open. Okay. And after this, you just go ahead around your pocket, pin, 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 and then we sew. All right, before we get started, I want to draw your attention to the direction the seam allowance is going where I've stitched the facing and the skirt pieces. I have it pointed away from me because I ultimately want it to fold down, and I want it here so that it can also be caught in the understitching, which will be done along this line here towards the bottom of the frame. More on that a little bit later. All right, so again, 5/8 inch seam, a little bit of back stitching, and we get started. And as instructed before, remove pins as you go. Again, you don't have to, but it's always a good idea. Okay, now here, since our guideline is going to be covered by our pocket lining, we can just use our existing stitching line as a guide. So we get to here. All right, needle down, presser foot up, remove your pin, pivot your work, presser foot down, and continue. Now, the good news is on the pocket lining, when you're stitching these parts together, you really don't have to be all that worried about using a 5/8 inch seam allowance. You can honestly go as narrow as a 1/4 inch, and I will show you how to do that. A 1/4 inch is usually found right around the edge, the outer edge of your presser foot. This is slightly more than a 1/4. Alright, so here we go, down the pocket. And when you're sewing on a curve like this, where the fabric can stretch, it's important not to stretch it, because you don't want to have a lumpy pocket or something that does not lay properly underneath your skirt, simply because it'll be uncomfortable and it can give you the appearance of having lumps on your leg, which could be weird. Alright, so we're just going to continue around here. Alright, now ladies and gents, we find ourselves on the final curve. The skirt is not far away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to increase my seam allowance as I go. That way, my stitching is in line with my notch that I marked with my pin. And I will go ahead and remove that pin. Stitch to where it was, needle down, presser foot up, turn our work, sorry about that. And what we'll do now, Alright, what we will do now is match up our side seams for the skirt, keep our pocket lining out of the way, presser foot goes back down, and we stitch to the end, all the way down the side of the skirt at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Alright, so here we go. We have our facing and waist seam centered. Our 5/8 inch seam is sewn. And here's our pocket. Look at that. Alright, and then we've got our side seam all the way down here. And I'm going to flip this over really quick. First though, I want to explain that my pocket is facing that way because this is going to be the front of my skirt. So my pocket will be on my left hip, the zipper will be on my right hip, just like the other skirt that I featured in my previous video. So now I'm going to flip this over, and here you see it. A couple things I would like to suggest to you. If you are using a plain seam and you wish to have it pressed open, you'll see that when you go to do that, this is stuck. It's okay to take your scissors, and I will do this right now. It is okay to take your scissors, trim right up into there, clip rather. That way it'll open out and you can press your seam flat. Now, up here at the top, this part is just going to get caught in the understitching, actually. Okay? And I will use my iron to press all that. Also down here, because this seam needs to be open, we will clip this as well. And if you have precision scissors, like embroidery scissors with a super pointy tip, it's okay to use those on that. So that will get pressed open as well. Obviously all of that gets pressed up, this gets pressed open, understitching happens, and then what that does is it keeps the pocket in place so that it doesn't go flopping all around where you don't want it. Pretty nifty, huh? Now let's get on to the invisible zipper. Alright, so here we have an invisible zipper, and you can see there are some pretty obvious differences between a standard zipper and an invisible zipper. First of all, the pull looks a lot different. It's very low profile, so it just kind of dangles there nicely and is generally hidden in the fabric. Also, you will see that the front of an invisible zipper looks an awful lot like the back of a regular zipper, and the back of the invisible zipper looks an awful lot like the front of a regular zipper. Okay, so what we have to do to install this is open it up, and we are going to take our skirt, or a garment rather, because you're not necessarily making a skirt, and we're going to get this laid out to where we can pin the zipper in place. So what I did is I took a break from recording and I went upstairs and I pressed all my seams out like a good girl, because I like to set a good example, and I went ahead and I pressed these seam allowances as well, just so that we have a guideline for where our zipper teeth are going to go. Okay, now some of you are probably like, oh my gosh, where do I even start with this? This doesn't look like it makes any sense at all. But I assure you, it does. So what we'll do is we will take our zipper, okay, we've got it open, and we're going to flip it over. So the right side of the zipper, meaning the front side of the zipper, is face down on the fabric. And we're going to use this pressing line as a guide. And you can also see how I'm lining up the top of my zipper tape with my seam line. And I'm also taking care not to bring my zipper too far over the crease, but I'm keeping it right there. Try and zoom this in a little bit. Oh, isn't that nice? I've got to get some better equipment. This iPhone can only do so much, especially on this stand I've got it on. Alright, so anyway, back to business. Here we go. So we can have the teeth just slightly past that press line. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to pin. Just a side note, this type of pinning is perpendicular pinning. If you remember from math class, perpendicular means the lines intersect. parallel pinning would be this way. I don't know what made me think of that. Probably because I've been working in a math class lately. Alright, so here we go, pinning down. And we will do one side of the zipper tape at a time. This zipper also requires a zipper foot. The one that I showed you earlier, you can use that, but my sewing machine actually came with a specific invisible zipper foot, which I thought was a little bit much, but it's actually pretty fantastic and it really does help me a lot. Not every sewing machine has that option or that piece available. So you can get by without it. I mean, for years and years, I used my grandmother's Kenmore sewing machine, and it was not fancy at all. Everything was manual right down to the buttonholer. Let me try and fix this again. But, you know, make do with what you've got. But if you ever find yourself in the market for a new sewing machine, there are a lot of different features to look out for and to make sure that you get, just to make life a little bit easier, especially if you're like me and you sew a lot. Alright, so here we are, and we are ready to use that invisible zipper foot and get things going. I'll see you at the sewing machine. Alright, here we are sitting with Betty again, and I want you to look at this zipper foot. This is my invisible zipper foot. This is where it latches onto the machine. That hole is where my needle goes in, and these two little channels are where the zipper teeth go, and you'll see how this works in just a moment. It was a little bit of a learning curve for me when I was first practicing with this foot and an invisible zipper, but practicing was well worth it because, as I said before, invisible zippers are my favorite. I put them in whatever garments I possibly can, and it's totally worth the extra effort, I promise you. Alright, so here we go. And again, we are using a regular stitch length, and you can see where I've placed the rounded edge of the zipper tape rather than put it on this side, because our needle would be on the outside of the zipper. We put it on this side so that our needle is on the zipper tape. Oops. So I'm just going to hold that thread there for a moment. Get started, do a little back stitch. I do apologize for my dog barking. He's very excited to be out today. The neighbor's dog is in the yard, well, his yard, and it's finally a nice enough day for everybody to be out. Alright, so here we go. Oops. And you can see that I snagged right there on the zipper stop at the top of the zipper, and that's okay. Not an issue. I just make sure that when I have to make adjustments like that, I keep my needle down so that I can lift my presser foot without my fabric shifting and causing minor delays in construction. Once I get this stitched on, there is something specific that I want to show you on the zipper tape. And I didn't mention this before, but it is worth mentioning, especially with invisible zippers. As I'm sewing this, you can probably see a distinct herringbone pattern right here. And then the closer you get to the zipper teeth, it's just an over-under. There is a reason for that, which most people are unaware of. So let me get this done. And this right here, down here at the bottom, near the pole, this is where it gets a little hairy, and 9 times out of 10 you will have to do a tiny bit of hand stitching, but again, it's worth it. Invisible zippers are always worth it. Alright, so looking at the difference in the weaving on the zipper tape, your stitching should always be between the teeth and the edge of that over-under. unless you are doing a zipper on trousers or jeans or something like that that have a fly, you should never ever stitch further over than that over under. Very rarely do you have a reason to stitch on the herringbone part of our zipper tape, okay? So you can clearly see my white stitching on this lovely red zipper. I thought that the red zipper pull would be a nice accent on the skirt itself. So here we go, we can zip that up and make sure that it functions. So far so good. Alright. Looking pretty good so far, I'd say. Okay, so now we're gonna unzip this and we'll do it again with the other side. Okay, here we go again. And I do have everything properly arranged now, and you'll notice that I'm being lazy and not pinning. I should pin, but I'm not gonna. So also, the thing that you'll notice is that everything is on the same side as it was when I did the first side of the zipper. So we're just going to keep on going, keeping our stitching in that plain weave on the zipper tape rather than on the herringbone weave. Couple more inches. All right, now the $1 million question. Did I screw it up again, or did I do it right? Okay. I've done it right. Oh, for Pete's sake. Here we go. Okay. So, as you can see, it is a mostly invisible zipper. You really wouldn't be able to see it if I had used white thread. But when I press this, I will be sure to press it in such a way that it creases over the zipper tape. And then down here, I'm sure you noticed the hole. This is fine. That can be stitched up by hand very easily. All you'll do, or all I will do, and if you find one on your invisible zipper installation, you will do the same. Flip your garment inside out, pull the zipper tape up and out of the way, and you can either stitch it closed by hand, or you can use your zipper foot to stitch that right there. And honestly, because I'm in a lazy sort of mood today, I'm actually filming on Saturday. I don't usually film these the day I air them. These are not live, they are pre-recorded. So here we go. We'll see how this works out. Okay, and even though we can't get right up in there, that's close enough. Okay, so let's take a look at this now. Significant improvement. Ta-da! So, look at everything you know how to do now. Centered zipper, lapped zipper, invisible zipper, adding a pocket, and understitching. Congratulations, you have just completed your first lesson with me. I hope you come back for more.